Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the ISF Bright Talk channel. My name is Hui Shan, Senior Analyst at the ISF, and I'm extremely excited to welcome you to our penultimate session of the ISF Cybersecurity Showcase Week. I'm delighted to be joined by Bernard Montal, EMEA Technical Director and Security Strategist at Tenable. With over 20 years in the industry, his expertise include cryptography, identity and access management, and SOC domains. So before we start, there are a few housekeeping items to cover off. This presentation will last for approximately 40 minutes, and then we'll end with a question and answer session. Please make sure you type any questions in the question box on your screen. All viewers are automatically muted, and so if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please leave the webinar and dial back in. Finally, this session, as well as all of the sessions throughout this week, will be recorded and available on demand via our Cyber Awareness Hub, which you can access using the link below. So with this being said, I will now hand you over to Bernard, and I'll return for our Q&A session in about 40 minutes time. Over to you, Bernard.
Thank you very much, Yui. First of all, it's really a pleasure to be here today and to share with you some elements regarding the threat landscape, the trends that we've seen so far at Tenable around our core business, helping our customers to identify the risk within the attack surface. So today, we will talk about a lot of elements around what we call an attack path. At Tenable, this is something we are really focusing on currently. But also we share with you, I don't have any agenda, but I will try to share verbally the agenda. Taking some examples around attacks against some sectors, specifically around what we call the critical infrastructures, and some of them as just as use cases as an example. So let's kick off and start the webinar. So don't hesitate to ask questions. We have a question section within the tool, and I will try to answer or on the fly or at the end of the presentation. So let's talk about critical infrastructures. When we are talking about attacks against critical infrastructure, sometimes we are focusing only on the main ones, the ones which are covered today on the headlines in the press or that everybody knows about, which is mainly around energy, around what we have today, or transport, or sometimes finance. So critical infrastructures, in fact, is targeting all of us. It's not only the transport, electricity, or communication. We also have critical infrastructures when we think about education, because this is the continuity about our family, our daily work, daily life. So everyone is really concerned. And we at Tenable, we used to do, looking at what's happened the year before, trying to find out how can we do some predictions for the year coming. We are working on that today, and let's we keep in touch because roughly around the January timeframe, we will begin to share with you our thought about 2022 and 2023, what's happened in 2022 to predict what's happened in 2023. But if we go back just at the beginning of this year, we published a report presenting the top 3 targeted sectors in EMEA in 2021: education, government, and healthcare. I'm pretty sure we will have very similar, in 2022. But one of the other elements we also highlighted is the fact that the ransomwares in 2021 was very, very high from an attack perspective. We're also looking at that globally, worldwide, but in EMEA only, we are close to 45% of ransomwares, leveraging 0 days, but mainly also leveraging existing vulnerabilities. I will not drill down here, but if you've seen recent attacks, against any kind of companies, we've seen proxy logon and proxy shell still very used in the wild. So misconfiguration as well. Even yesterday, we had a very important software vendor that has disclaimed a breach, not because there were a vulnerability, but because there were a misconfiguration of one of their devices accessible, from internet. We also see two kind of problems regarding what we call physical and software supply chain. It was in 2021, but in 2022 as well, we can really have seen the two kind of attacks. One is really physical supply chains, which is targeting mainly critical infrastructures, having a direct or indirect impact to people, but also the software supply chains. We all remember at the end of 2020, Log4j, but a couple of weeks ago as well, I think it was this week or the week before, we also still have some open source frameworks, Apache again, that has been, not really targeted, but there were some vulnerabilities, and that is called software supply chains, because at the end of the day, we have a domino effect. So in 2022, in continuity, we've seen so far three main, targets. The first one is obviously remote workers, with a couple of tools that we are using daily, with some of them with 0 days in the summertime frame, but obviously by targeting the tools we are using for remote working, some vulnerabilities are there and they can be used for targeting remote workers. So that is one of them. The second one is critical infrastructure and attacks against critical infrastructures. I gave a couple of examples here, but I will not drill down because I will focus on some others for that specific webinar. And last but not least is obviously the rapid cloud adoption, which is also linked to the first one, the remote workers. We needed to put in place a lot of cloud services, sometimes in a rush, but also the development tools regarding the dev ops are also targeted. GitHub, GitLab, and some others repositories that are now linked back to the software supply chain attacks are targeted specifically when they are on native cloud, because then they can again having that domino effect. As I said, I wanted to highlight some more recent attacks and not only talking about what's happened 6 months or a year ago. The first one is obviously targeting automotive industry. The second one is transport with Uber, and we all know this brand and company. In the UK, you have a company called Revolut that has suffered of cyber attacks recently. With some of information has been breached, not a lot, some of them, and they've managed that very well regarding the communication, because they contacted their customers one by one if they knew that they've been breached. But also in the transport industry in the US, American Airlines has just also disclosed a data breach, and that is also yet another important critical infrastructures. All of them could be part of critical infrastructures: transport, bank, and automotive. But if you look at automotive itself, from a sector perspective, why automotive is targeted today? If you step back a minute and not talk about the techniques and the attacks, and we can talk about that because we have daily attacks today of everywhere. The automotive industry didn't change for roughly 100 years. We still have the same kind of car that has been created by Ford, Renault, and all of them a long time ago. Gasoline cars with 4 wheels, and everything is just the evolution of that for a long time. Now, what's happened for the past 5 years, and even beginning a couple of years before, is a complete change. A change in the in just the fact that the engine has changed itself, but in change of the infrastructure. the change of the fact that we are now EV, electric vehicle, and the fact that as well the business model has changed. Is now we are capable of upgrading a car by just downloading an upgrade. If you want to have more power, if you want to have more capacity on your battery, is that also a download of a new option. And that is a brand new business model. Connected cars, EV cars, and the fact that now the car are highly connected is something that never happened for the past 100 years, which is a revolution for this industry. And when there is such kind of change, there is IT change and IT transformation and digital transformation, which mean a risk for this sector, because any kind of digital transformation represent risk. And one of the risks is obviously if you change your IT and you've changed completely the way you're working, then this is an opportunity for hackers. This is why we've seen so far in 2022 some attacks against this specific sector. Going back to another sector, we just mentioned it at the beginning of this presentation, the energy sector. The energy sector as well is living a transformation. We are going from transformation from the production part, from the transport as well. We all heard about what's happened in some pipelines in Europe, and also the usage. I've just mentioned electric vehicle, but smart meters as well are brand new, and again for more than many decades, these never changed. Now, we also have a context on the energy sector. We all know what's happened today, a lack of energy. But this is not because of what's happened regarding the geopolitical aspect. That also came out after the pandemic. We know that energy is rare. We know to have to change the way we are using it. It's a full transformation from carbon to green energy. And then again, if there is transformation, there is digital transformation, and I will repeat exactly what I've just said, which is digital transformation is an opportunity for hackers, and they are taking care of it. They are really taking opportunities to slow down, shutting down, and sometimes getting access to some plants and having what they have to do. So that was the second sector. The third one, and I know that you already covered that a lot, recently in some other webinars, where I will go very quickly on this one. What is unique on this one, which is different from the other ones, is the uniqueness of the data, which is represented on healthcare, which is our own personal body data, what's happened to us personally, and that has an impact that the hackers knows very well, and they can monetize it highly. Because if there is a personal healthcare data breach, that there is no version 2 of my personal data, okay? That is before and after the breach. Now my personal data is out, so they can really monetize a lot that kind of data. Now, as I said to you, we are really living in a digital transformation. And to give you a couple of examples, for some of you that has been in cybersecurity for a while, we know what we called a long time ago the castle. We needed to protect a set of assets we can really physically handle in a data center. But that transformation occurred when now we have identities, in and out. We still have Active Directory, which is very important internally, but we also now have identities which are managed externally as well with those cloud applications. For some of the industry, and I mentioned, for example, the car industry and the power industry, they also have OT systems. But all of us, all of the organizations went to virtual machines, web app. That was roughly 5 to 10 years ago. We began to virtualize our assets. We began to virtualize our IT. And we're going even further. We are talking about containers and cloud. In some cases, we're not even talking about operating systems anymore. If you already have done that transformation, we are talking about serverless. So how can we handle the threats? How can we handle the vulnerabilities attached to those threats? if that is now, the very highly fragmented infrastructure that we have in front of us. We have to take care about the fact that now the attack surface that we have in front of us is also highly fragmented, highly volatile, and highly, agile. So that is a new challenge that we have, and we have to address that challenge differently. So how can we do it? Also, in the fact that, and I mentioned that at the very early beginning, the majority of us are now are working from home, not 100% from home that it was the case in the lockdown. But for me, for example, today I'm delivering this webinar from home because we have introduced a new paradigm that no one was aware about or were taking care about a long time ago. Only very few of us were working from home before the pandemic. And today we still have 1, 2, 3, 4 days sometimes from home, which is very important to take care about. Who could have imagined a couple of years ago that we needed to use a domestic network that never been designed to be secure? Before that, we had corporate network and outside. Today, we have a lot of applications which are even accessible even off of the VPN. Sometimes I'm using the VPN, sometimes I'm going directly to some cloud applications without going to the VPN. Why, going back to the corporate network if I can have access directly to the data directly off VPN? So yes, after the pandemic, we've seen a lot of attacks targeting people and remote workers, and that's one of the quotes of one of our customers. And that study has been done a year ago, but I think it's still very useful because after 2 years of pandemics, roughly, we still have COVID-19. We are still working from home, and that's one of the very important elements. So going back to basic, talking about how the attackers are trying to penetrate our systems. There are many kind of threats on the left, trying to target asset on the right. That never stopped, and we still have a lot of attacks every day. When it was a long time ago, every week, now it's roughly every day. We have many kinds of threats targeting many kind of assets, and they are all try to find what I'm calling doors open. Calling that vulnerabilities. If you are if we have technical people around the table, what our adversary are trying to do is try to find an attack path. They try to find a way from going to penetrate an entry point, not just an endpoint, an entry point. Today, an entry point can be an IoT system within an OT space. It could be just a server or serverless container within the cloud, or it could be anywhere where you have some assets which is accessible in internet, from internet. So that notion of attack path is not new, but in the past, we were only looking after a list of vulnerabilities to be patched. Today, if you step back a minute, you will understand this is much more complex than it was before. So a couple of other examples, an area of the attack surface. On-prem, IT, internet-facing assets. If you look at Equifax here, they've been attacked because there were a vulnerability on Apache Struts framework, again, an open source Apache vulnerabilities. They managed to patch all of their servers, except the one they didn't know. And within the attack surface, which is publicly facing internet assets, sometimes you don't know because you just never discovered the entire attack surface. This is why, for example, we have now a capacity for covering what we call internet-facing asset or attack surface management. And Equifax was a very good example. And again, public cloud, OT, and identity, web applications. There are many other examples, and we can spend much more than just an hour for drilling down to all of them. But instead of seeing them in silo, and this is just another example about black energy, but again, keeping that very quickly, there is a vulnerability in the IT. There is a password guessing around Active Directory targeting, and they want to target from some very specific, asset within the OT space. So this is a very good example about that malware called Black Energy that really wanted to break those silos. But if I come back here, today the majority of those perimeters are managed in silos. We have technology for cloud, we have technology for IT and vulnerability management, we have other technologies for identities, but those are in silos. If you look at this one as an example, going back to black energy, our hackers and the adversary and the attackers are not looking that in silos. They are trying to find a way to go from A to Z, and they don't care if that is managed by another team. For example, if the OT team is doing that in silo and the IT team is doing that in silo, they are not working together. Again, adversaries, they don't care about the fact that we have different teams or different tools. They try to find a way to go from here to here by, finding vulnerabilities, having escalation of privilege within the Active Directory, and then target what they want to target. Now, imagine if we can discover those attack paths before the attackers. And again, that was one of the main subjects regarding that webinar today. The goal is now to make the links between those silos. The goal is to be able to find out if that very specific asset, which is in this container or these virtual machines, if that group of people can have access to this virtual machine and they shouldn't have that, we need to highlight that very quickly. And if that group of people or that specific user have access to this virtual machine, I want to know if that specific people or user have access to which other machines within my IT system or my global infrastructure. That is what we call an attack path. Discover attack path today is giving us the capacity to do it before the attackers. Now, how can we do that? So again, this example about, imagine we find the vulnerabilities of someone working from home and having, obviously in his domestic network, many devices that can be used by attackers to make, escalation of privileges or just identity theft. Now, if that specific user has access to a specific machine, and then potentially will have access to that critical server and have what we call an AD dominance. In the majority of the cases, for some of organizations that have also OT systems, if this is not properly configured, or if there is a specific vulnerabilities, or if there is no MFA protecting the VPN, this identity can be compromised. And then because sometimes, and the majority of the times, AD is also part of the IT system and the OT system as well, we can then having what we call a jump from IT to OT, and then having people like the black energy example I've just presented before, going down to this part of the OT system. If you look at what's happened a year ago with Colonial Pipeline attack, that's exactly what's happened. Someone has been compromised, an identity has been compromised, and then ransomware attacks begin to be efficient on the IT side. What the company has decided to do, because they detected it, is shut down their OT side because they were afraid about this capacity going from IT to OT, and having the same identity being used with high privilege to be able to do a domain dominance and Active Directory dominance on the OT side as well. Now, going ahead, we then need to change our mind. We need to go from the legacy VM where scanning is not just enough. How can we scan, for example, an asset in the cloud? How can we scan just a specific PLC for some of you who know it, which is OT systems. So only legacy VM and scanning, which is just a screenshot, is not enough today. We moved to a second generation of vulnerability management, which is a risk-based vulnerability management, which is continuous scanning, continuous capacity to see everything, but with a risk-based approach, because having just a list of vulnerabilities is not enough. We have to orchestrate it. You have to find and define priorities, but you have to do that with a risk approach. We are now in the third generation, bringing everything together, breaking those silos, having a capacity to have a view, which is linked between the cloud and what I would say from the ground to the cloud. Being able to see everything and link them together is exactly what we call the cyber exposure management. Not just looking after vulnerabilities and patching, but also capacity to understand the business context, the risk attached to that specific asset or those specific assets linking together. That's exactly what we have decided to do at Tenable. We now have a capacity, and we decided to not only continuing obviously to cover those spaces, but also linking everything together to be able to give our customer the capacity to be able to take decisions. That's what we've decided to do with the Tenable Exposure Management Platform. We are very proud on the fact that we have launched it at the beginning of October, what we call a new platform called Tenable One. Imagine if you can have vulnerability management system data, web application, cloud security, or asset discovery, internet asset discovery, or identity security into one single data lake, data platform, and being able to visualize your posture, your risk, understand the attack path, and having all your asset coming from all those five sources into one place. Those are the five sources that we are beginning with, but we will also add, in addition to that, obviously the OT data that we have with Tenable OT, or other kind of third-party data that we will bring to the platform going ahead. All in all, that's exactly what I wanted to share with you today. I hope you enjoy the presentation, but it's time for us to have interactions and Q&A. And I will stop sharing, and then I want to first of all thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernard. That was a very informative and fascinating presentation. So as you said, we are now opening the floor to the questions the audience have been sending throughout the session. So please note the question box is still live, so please input any further queries you may have around today's discussion and the topic. So, okay, let's just have a look into the questions. Yes. So, Bernard, I think you have also mentioned that, and also we have seen quite a lot of security incident happened for the past 2 years on critical infrastructures around the world. So we definitely understand that critical infrastructures are under pressure. So how can Tenable help in identifying what is important to patch?
So, and I'm trying also to answer to the question in which are lively coming as well. It's all about the risk approach. When we do just a scan, the way we were doing it before was we have a new application, and then we scan it, or we decide to scan on a regular basis, like every month. So obviously, if the time frame is very close, we then are very close to continuous monitoring. So the answer is around two elements. Number one is obviously the risk-based approach. We cannot consider that because the vulnerability has a very high CVSS, we have to patch all of them. From a compliance perspective, potentially we have to do it. But from a risk perspective, what is important is to understand what is risky for the business. We call that, asset criticality. If you understand how much your asset is very critical for your business, then you will prioritize based on the risk. On my presentation, I said, for example, that classical approach of just scanning is not enough. Just to mention, to be precise on that, we will still use scanners, okay, for discovering asset on the classical IT assets, and doing scanners and Nessus, if you are using it, is still used even if we are doing continuous monitoring. It's not that I was telling. What I was telling is, the more you do continuous monitoring, the better you will be in a position to understand if there is any misconfiguration arriving tomorrow. You've done your scan, you've done your screenshot, and the analogy is really between the screenshot and a movie. I think we need to be in a movie space. We need to have continuous monitoring. You're not, switching on your camera once per week. You want to detect if there is any mistakes all the time. So that's exactly the same analogy that I want to say. It's not the fact that you don't have to use scanners below the scene and under. Obviously, the scanners are still there, but the more important message here is to do that on a regular basis, continuous monitoring, risk-based.
Exactly as you said, hackers, they don't take holidays, don't they?
No.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, we have another question here. So, as you mentioned that you have showed all these different, let's say, components or assets. So we have like cloud, Active Directory, we have network, computers, OT environments. So we still need to have specialized solutions as those are very different environments, right? And how Tenable are doing that?
In two ways. We will continue to be able to provide what we call specialized solutions. Obviously, someone, an expert in a cloud or DevOps, won't be able to handle any OT vulnerability, that's for sure. So we will continue to be able to address everywhere within the attack surface. If we have a blind spot, Tenable will try to find a way to cover that blind spot with internal development that we've done in the past, or also external acquisition. In the past 3 years, we acquired 5 companies, one in the cloud space. The first we acquired was in the OT space, because we realized that by having IT tools for finding vulnerabilities or misconfigurations on the OT space, that doesn't work. Okay, so we needed to be able to have a specialized technology. So OT was the first one. Then we went to acquire AdSeed, on the Active Directory. The same, scanning with Nessus Active Directory, you will find a lot of information. But having a dedicated native AD capacity with Tenable AD, we have much more. So we needed to have that as well. So we acquired Accurix for native cloud and having infrastructure as code. And so we acquired a lot of companies for the past 3 years, 5 of them, including Bit Discovery for discovering the asset, external assets. But we will continue to be able to help our customers if they have one single, let's say, issue or want to cover one space only. But as I presented at the end of the presentation, we realized as well that it was important to bring everything together. Our existing customers having Tenable AD and Tenable IO or Tenable SC for the vulnerability management part ask us for the past year roughly, hey, can you help me to bring them together? Can you help me to link the misconfiguration that you are discovering on the AD and the asset? And if, for example, that misconfiguration is granting privilege for an admin and then having access to specific asset, I want to know the posture of that asset. I want to know all the vulnerabilities which are linked to that asset now, because it looks like someone has just opened a door, which is what we call a vulnerability globally. And I want to be sure that this door is not giving a full attack path to some target and very risky targets.
Yes, thank you, Bernard. I think as you mentioned that there was a case in your presentation that the customer can be doing all the patches to all the systems that they know, but something happened, maybe a backdoor is opened to the asset or components that they are not aware of. So that is critical and crucial to have everything identified and bring on to the same platform as you can provide a service, and you can look at the threats and you can look at vulnerabilities altogether. Yeah, that was a really good answer. So I think that's all the questions we have so far. If you do have any questions, please pop in. And again, I would thank you again. Thank you very much, Bernard, for your brilliant presentation today. And we are almost ready to conclude our session. So again, if you have missed anything from this webinar, it will be available on demand by the Cyber Awareness Hub, which you can access down below, where you will also have the link to download your free Cyber Awareness Month resource kit. So if you have enjoyed today's session, please feel free to leave a rating down below. I also look forward to seeing you this afternoon for our final session in this ISF cybersecurity showcase week from Gareth Haken, who will be exploring the ISF approach to managing risk. So thank you very much for your listening. Everyone,
Thank you.
have a good day.